people who moved out of the parents' house before 30. How? Yep, my first apartment was cheap and in a really bad neighborhood, and in really poor condition. I like to say that I worked so hard so I'd never have to live in a place like that again. But housing is so expensive all over that region now that if I moved back home I doubt I could afford to live anywhere there now, even making as much more as I earn now, and not having crippling student loans as so many young people do. I dropped out of college when I ran out of money and moved to said bad neighborhood. Same. I got sick of roommates after a while and had my own small unit, but my husband lived at home until his 40s, when we got together, which is how we had a deposit and were able to get a mortgage. I am not sure how saving up for something like a deposit happens for people on regular or low income who are renting in areas with high cost of housing. I've been out of home since I was 18, took a gap year and worked full-time managing a shoe store, quit my job and went to uni, got a low-paying job straight out of uni but worked my way up to a much better job within 2 years, just bought my first house with my husband last December at age 28. Probably important to note that I don't live in America. My degree was $30,000 and my country offers a very reasonable university debt repayment scheme. This was early 2010s. Job. Accepted that the life I wanted to have versus what I could afford were two very different things. Knowing that 2.5k downtown loft apartment was probably not the best decision when I could find a run-down, but entirely livable 1BR for $900. Going out each weekend is fun, but 99-cent rental from Redbox was fun enough and cheap. Lots of living within my means. Note, I can't say all this without acknowledging this gets harder to do each year because literally nothing is cheap anymore. Yay, I graduated in 2008, in the midst of a global recession, and still managed to move out from my parents' house by 2009. A lot of work and overtime and a lot of cutting spending wherever I could, and 2 roommates to split an actually pretty nice 3-beer house just outside the city so we didn't have to live in a shithole shoebox. Commuting sucks but you get used to it. Not being able to spend the money you have on fun shit sucks too. But when you put it in perspective for the rest of your life it's definitely pretty worth it, and all my savings and budgeting allowed me to buy one of my dream cars in my early 20s. If you prioritize the things you really want long term instead of immediate satisfaction every time you get a paycheck, it just works out way better in the long run. That said, I have no idea how anyone who is graduating or entering the workforce right now can even manage. Even basic things like pasta or ramen noodles are rapidly becoming not cheap. I'm doing okay for myself and even I get fucking demoralized going to the grocery store these days, and count myself lucky that my rent hasn't really gone up yet. Really gotta suck for young people these days. I can't even imagine. Yes, but I inherited and sold in 3 months. So no tax on gains BC, nothing really changed in 3 months. I would live in an apartment paycheck to have my dad back. I was his caregiver for 7 months and he died at home, no pain. But I cooked, helped dress him and drove him everywhere. A nurse came and bathed him. He would be happy about our move. Sorry, crying a little. My dad raised me from age 3 alone after the divorce. I love my dad. I was out by 2001 but same thing. Moved a few states away, got married, bought a house, bought a few rental properties, all while working as a mechanic, and my ex-wife was a service advisor to dealership. I have 3 step-kids and live in San Diego now and have no idea what they are going to do if they want to move out. Average rent is almost double what I was paying for my first house, and even with cars higher minimum wage, they are still making less per hour than I was 20-something years ago, adjusted for inflation. Yeah, Let's not do that. I'm not from us, but I see the often people move a few states away. I have questions and I finally dare to ask lol. Is it normal to just move so far away in America? I mean, isn't it weird leaving all your friends and family behind? Do you just learn a new town and make friends? I don't know if you can compare Europe, but for me moving a few states away would be going from the Netherlands to Italy or something. It is extremely common for people to move states. A lot of times people feel restricted by the place they grow up and decide to head for greener pastures, so to speak. Our states are much less different than the countries of Europe though, so I could see why it would be done so much less there. Sometimes they think they are doing the right thing. My parents told me I either had to go to college or move out when I graduated HS in 2013. I barely made it out of high school, so I got a job right away and have been on my own since. They didn't do it to be mean though. They were trying to make me a productive member of society, but I've easily spent over 100k in rent in the past 9 years, so living at home would have been a game changer. Living frugally, I couldn't afford consoles. I couldn't afford TV. Even my cell was a used unit I got for cheap. All I could afford was food, rent and basic utilities. But that leaves a lot of time for work. So I work. It's not fun. Now I am better off, so I am enjoying myself with things I never had in my youth. So pardon this 40-plus-year-old nearing 50 dude that still watches cartoons and plays video games. 2032 my sons will be about the age to venture out. Living in a van down by the river is no longer hipster of hash van life, but is now considered posh and out of reach for most. They rent sleeping lockers outside the fulfillment center. Each locker has hollow vision and free space internet. They own nothing, and have no desire to have kids of their own. They go days without speaking to another human in person at all. 2006, split $220 per week rent between two in an area unpopular for young renters. Seems to be that rents have doubled in that area for the same kind of place, as have salaries for the job I had at the time. I had a cheap second-hand car, minimized driving, had few hobbies, bought second-hand or sale clothes. That said, we had no internet, no computer at home, no gaming consoles, no streaming service. Phones were relatively cheap and groceries are horribly more expensive now. I think it's still achievable, just harder. Well, sometimes it's cultural. Sometimes people are kicked out. Some are forced to stay and help. Some ended up staying forever. No shame. Life is what you make it. I moved out at 24 after attending university with a gap year. Lived on campus. Moved to the city and lived with roommates I had just met. Lived paycheck to paycheck. Loved every minute. Then hustled for a new career with training while juggling jobs. Then switched careers and moved up the ladder. Sheer will and determination not to move back in with my parents. Jobs, roommates, frugal living. Don't get me wrong, my parents are awesome people. But I'm an adult, and when I turned 18, as the last kid, it was time for them to have their lives. They'd welcome me back even now in my 30s if I needed it. But it isn't fair to them. And so my determination to give them their privacy and lives keeps me from doing so. I'm 30 now. I've moved in and out many times. It was 2010 and shit hadn't gotten crazy after the collapse yet. I moved out at 18 to live with roommates before going to college. I stayed until the following summer and then did the get a place move back in with parents cycle each school year. I stayed from 21 to 25 and then moved in with another roommate. When I lived on my own I lived in poverty, counting quarters from the couch to buy food sometimes. So I was great at spending little money and stuck to it when I started making it. I used my mom's house as a launching pad while I grew my business that I purchased at 23 with savings I gathered while living with mom. I moved out on my own with a roommate when I felt confident that I could pay my bills and save for the future. I wanted the experience before moving in with my now husband. I had enough for a down payment but wanted to wait until I was married to my then serious boyfriend to buy a house, and I sat on that money. The next year one moved in with my husband. I have never and will never live alone. It would be impossible for me to afford. COVID took that business I built, and I have received around $12,000 in unemployment for the trouble. The federal and state government let my business flounder until there was nothing left, while large companies siphoned out PPP money. I make about the same in my job that I can barely tolerate, but hey, at least my mom can't hear my orgasms here, in my house that I love. I bought a house after losing the business and the market going crazy because I had additional down payment money that I inherited from my father, who died when I was 15. My husband had steady enough income that he could put the mortgage in his name. His pay is just enough to cover our bills except food and gas, so I don't fucking know how they really believed we could lay it. But we do. We live in the West Coast in what used to be a very affordable place that is now getting overflown with big city refugees who can't afford their old lifestyles any longer. I was able to move out because I was allowed to stay and I didn't blow all my money while I was working 70-hour weeks. I had support and privilege. I started working when I was 15, and kept working all through high school. I started working 3 hours on school days and 6 on weekends, then 5 on school days and 8 on weekends once I turned 16. I graduated when I was 17 and I had already planned out where I was going to college and getting an apartment near it, and had saved enough money to make that happen. Then once I moved, I got a job near where I lived. I had a roommate who was a friend from high school going to the same college as me, and we were in the downtown of a fairly large city where our school was, and we both got jobs at different places near to where we lived so we could walk everywhere. I worked at a Chinese food place and he worked at a movie rental place. Fuck. I'm getting nostalgic as hell. Can I go back? Have you looked into that Southern Brooklyn ferry to Wall St? It's gonna shake things up a lot. But if you're working on Wall Street, I'd suggest just moving a few stops into Brooklyn. The train ride will be longer, but it's plenty affordable on a Wall Street salary. Brooklyn is what Manhattan used to be. They say that for a reason, because there's more exciting and artistic things going on in BK these days. And it's cheaper. Been putting away money since I was 13 when I mowed my neighbor's yards. Then at 18, I quit that and got a legitimate job at a grocery store, was able to put more money away and budget wisely, and was eventually able to afford the rent on my first, and current, apartment in 2020 at age 19. It's have long since quit the grocery store jobs. And between then and now, I've worked at a steel mill, HD tractor parts manufacturer, and now I work in construction. Each job paid more and more, allowing me to have enough money to cover all bills and expenses, plus some left over for whatever. They kicked me out. I had no choice, so I moved in with my grandma. She was abusive and kicked me out too. Now I'm staying with my friend's family and looking for an apartment. Everything is so expensive and I don't understand how people do this willingly.